Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just got into some of the bigger storylines in the conference going into the Big 12 year. Obviously not one of the, will be one of the crazier conferences, but in terms of preseason stuff, there's not quite as much to talk about because we don't know what to talk about yet. There's so many different teams that could be involved in this thing that it's going to be all over the place. I can almost promise you that. But let's get into some tiers. Let's break down just where I see every team right now. And it's not necessarily the way that I would rank these teams, but maybe sort of the public perception slash just kind of the way that I see this kind of playing out, at least from a national standpoint going into the season. And I think one of the interesting things here is one of the teams that we'll talk about a little bit later in the show, I'm a little bit lower on, finds their way into this top contenders list, at least in terms of preseason talk. And let's talk about them. Let's get into Kansas State, Arizona State, and Texas Tech. Those are who I consider to be the quote-unquote top contenders. I think Kansas State kind of kicks that off. They have the best odds to win this conference. They are one of the best teams in this conference. They have an incredible defense with a lot of guys returning, like VJ Payne, like Austin Romaine, like Desmond Purnell. They have a lot of really, really good talent on that side of the ball. Avery Johnson has to take a step forward. That's kind of the big question in the air around that team is if he can take the step forward. You got Dylan Edwards right next to him. You have Joe Jackson right behind Dylan Edwards. You have Jace Brown on the outside. You have really good talent on this football team all around Avery Johnson. He can't make the mistakes he made a year ago. And he played good football, considering that this was his first time starting. I think we might have put a little bit too much on him going into his first year, probably including myself going into last year, but at the end of the day, I do think this is a very talented team, a very talented quarterback. If he can just dial back those mistakes just a little bit, I think this could be a team that really maybe even runs the table. As crazy as that sounds in a conference like this, I think they have that top-end ability. Obviously, Arizona State's in this group. You're returning Sam Leavitt, returning Jordan Tyson, hopefully will be fully healthy as they head into the season, bringing in some really fun transfer pieces that we'll talk about a little bit later, returning tons on defense, including your leader in Xavier Alford. They've got dudes. There's no doubt about that. Obviously, the big-time question is, can you repeat the magic you had a year ago? You won a lot of one-score games, whether it was Mississippi State at the beginning of the year. I believe it was BYU with the craziness at the end of that game. There was a lot going on for Arizona State, and the ball bounced their way quite a bit last year. Can they find a way to make things a little bit cleaner, especially with Cam Skadbu not being the big-time kind of eraser of a lot of the issues that they had a year ago? He just kind of went in and handled all of it in certain moments where the offense couldn't move the ball. Obviously, he's not going to be around to do that. So, going to be interesting to see how this team develops. I think they still have all the talent in the world and will be able to make some noise, but obviously a couple more hurdles this year than when you had Cam Skadbu in the backfield. Then you got Texas Tech. From the talent level, this is absolutely a team in a great position. I think they brought in some great players with David Bailey, Lee Hunter, Romello Height from Georgia Tech. I think is a very upside player, but overall, you still got some questions. There's no doubt about that. I really think they can start fast in this season, and they probably have to, at least in my mind. I think the noise around this team will get very loud very quickly, and they're going to have to be able to handle all that. The best way to handle it is to be positive noise around you going into week 5, week 6, whenever that is, where you have that first big-time matchup. Can't exactly remember off the top of my head, but will be a huge year for Texas Tech, and I think it's one of those teams that is going to be very volatile in terms of what happens early in the season. If they can execute early in the season, get a couple of wins under the belt, they're going to feel great. If it looks a little bit sloppy, even if they get some wins, maybe this thing starts to tumble a little bit more. But it'll be interesting to watch this develop. I think these three teams, to me, from a talent level, from a quarterback, from a coaching level, are just a little bit above this next group, but this next group is not far behind by any means. And I like to call it the Tier 2 nightmare. I think there is very few quote-unquote tiers in this conference. It's very hard to break down this conference, but the way I see it is these four teams, kind of like what we talked about yesterday with the ACC, the kind of X-factor teams in this conference. I think one of these teams is very likely to make a run to the championship game. Maybe they won't. Maybe one of those 2 out of the 3 in the top contenders will, but I do think these four will have plenty to say. We'll start with Iowa State, the team that was there a year ago. Rocco Becht is back. The run game will be good with Abu Sama and Carson Henson. I think the wide receiver room is good. I think replacing those two guys from a year ago is going to be really, really tough. Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel were about as good as you're going to see at Iowa State for quite some time. But at the end of the day, I do think it's a very talented team. Matt Campbell obviously knows how to coach. I like some of the pieces on defense. They're obviously going to be a team that factors into this conference. Baylor absolutely will be a team in this thing. Dave Aranda has his team now. I think Sawyer Robertson's one of the best quarterbacks, maybe the best quarterback in the entire conference. Bryson Washington has to be pretty special. They just lost Dawson Pendergrass to an injury that probably will keep him out for the entire season. You got to get Bryson Washington the ball early and often. He's got to execute early and often. So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch, no doubt about it. Probably need to find a true difference maker on the outside. I like Josh Cameron. Can he take that big time step forward like he did in that bowl game late last year? And then you move on to Utah. Devin Dampier coming in from New Mexico is a massive. Jason Beck coming in from New Mexico might be even bigger. He's an incredible offensive coordinator. He takes over for Andy Ludwig that had some great moments. I think really the Cam Rising injury story kind of poo-pooed that time for Andy Ludwig just a little bit more, but love the addition of Jason Beck. I think people are misunderstanding how good this defense is going to be. Whether it's Teo Johnson or Logan Fano or all of the guys they have on this team, it's going to be a really good group on the defensive side of the ball, and Kyle Whittingham very rarely misses 2 years in a row. So I think that's a really interesting team to watch. We'll absolutely play some massive games throughout this season that will define this conference in a lot of ways. And then TCU kind of rounds this out for me, at least the way that I see it. Josh Hoover is about as good as anyone in this conference. He is very experienced, confident player. Kind of reminds me of Max Duggan. I don't want to get any hopes up over there in Dallas, but at the end of the or in Fort Worth, excuse me. But in the end of the day, I do think it's going to be really interesting to watch. The defense, I think, has a lot of really good upside. Obviously, have to play a little bit more consistent, but a very good, talented defense that could help out an offense that I think could kind of go through the roof this year, especially if Eric McAllister can hit the way that he's been able to in the past. Then we got the dangerous but on the outside, at least in my eyes, of this group, and I think it's a pretty expansive group. We'll start with Colorado. I don't know what Colorado will be. I really don't. I think Caden Salter is an absolute wild card. He could play great football one week and then turn the ball over 4 times the next week. I have no idea. They have so much turnover, but what I can tell you is Deion's going to have those guys ready to roll. And they're going to have plenty of talent on that roster. Can they put it all together is going to be the big-time question, but I'd be shocked if we got out of this year and Colorado didn't have at least one notch on its belt, at least one big-time win, one big-time upset that people were not expecting. It's a very good team. It's a team that obviously is coached very well, as we saw a year ago. They should be able to, at the very least, throw a wrench into the works, maybe even find their way back into the conversation like they were a year ago. And then you got Kansas. Jalen Daniels is as good as anyone in this conference when he's really going. Obviously, he's got to be at his best. He's got to be fully healthy, which has been the big-time question mark. But the talent level alone is very incredible. I think it's a really interesting team. They brought in some very nice transfer pieces. Obviously, they got a little bit of work to do, but they absolutely could be the team that they were at the end of last year, where they just threw a wrench into just about everyone's schedule, so much so that they threw a wrench into Iowa State, and then Iowa State was able to bounce back and get to the Big 12, partly because of what Kansas did to other teams down the stretch. So it's a very talented team, obviously very well coached by Lance Leipold. I think they're going to be able to at least make things interesting with a couple of these big-time teams. Then you have Houston. I really like this team. I think adding Connor Wegman to a Willie Fritz operation could look a lot like what Michael Pratt did at Tulane. Obviously, the talent level is going to be a little bit up from when he was at Tulane, but the talent that this kid has is undeniable. Connor Wegman is not a terrible quarterback that absolutely everyone was wrong about. He can make some big-time plays, and injuries and some different stuff at Texas A&M got in his way, but I think this could be a really interesting team going forward, and they could put together a really fun season. Then you have Oklahoma State. Mike Gundy is maybe out after this year. There's been a lot of speculation around that. They did extend him to 2028, I believe, but at the end of the day, you never really know what's going to happen with some of these coaches, especially in the world of college football we live in today. It's a weird quarterback situation. It might be Haas Henne. There's a couple other guys out there that can make a run at it. It's going to be weird. There's no doubt about that. It's going to be an interesting season, but when everyone's focusing on everyone else, tends to be when Mike Gundy does his best work. So I think there's going to be a couple of weekends where we don't know how, but Oklahoma State gets a big time win over one of the big time contenders in this conference. BYU, big time quarterback questions. I like McKay Hillstead. I don't think he's going to be incredible for this team, but Kalani Sitake has every ability to make some special stuff happen. I still think they have some great wide receivers on the outside, even losing Keelan Marion. LJ Martin should be able to help in the run game and make things a little bit easier on Hillstead, at least early on. It'll be interesting to watch this team. I think it's one of the more fascinating teams in the country, obviously with all the transfer portal stuff that has gone on, but a very talented team, one of those teams that if the quarterback comes together, maybe they shoot up these rankings a little bit higher than I'm thinking. And then Cincinnati. Brendan Sorsby is a relatively smaller known guy, but a really good player, a guy that can really put it together multiple weeks in a row, and someone that gives Cincinnati a chance to win. They also bring in Evan Pryor from Ohio State, a running back that was kind of just buried on the depth chart there. He found his way over, I believe, last season, but is really kind of hitting his stride and could be a very dangerous guy to watch this year. And then you got the last group, and there's only 3 teams in this bottom group. You're likely not in the hunt, but at this point, who knows? At the end of the day, like we talked about, Arizona State was picked to finish last. So what do I know about this conference at this point? But UCF, Scott Frost isn't walking into the greatest spot. You lose RJ Harvey, it's going to be a little bit interesting down there in Central Florida. I think they have some upside at the quarterback position with Taven Jackson, but I don't necessarily love this team. I think it's going to be really, really hard to make this put together. West Virginia, same thing with Rich Rod. He's not necessarily walking back into a great situation in there in Morgantown, and also it's a very, very fast-paced offense. You're going to want to use a lot of running backs. It sounds like he has about 2 running backs that he feels confident in right now. I love Jaheim White. I think he's an absolute beast, but I think it's going to be a really fast-paced offense where it's going to have to be more than Jaheim White, and I don't know if they have more than Jaheim White. And then Arizona, I hate it for Noah Fafita. I think he's a very talented guy, but the roster is just not very good. I don't really trust the coaching staff. I think it's going to be pretty ugly for Arizona this year. But overall, who knows? All these tiers could mean absolutely nothing in a couple of weeks when Arizona goes and gets a huge win somewhere, or when Oklahoma State comes out of nowhere and puts together a 10-win season. We'll find out how the Big 12 wraps up, and I'll give my questionable picks at the end of this, but let's move on, or let's take a little bit of a break here, and when we come back, let's talk about all the players that you need to know in this conference. We'll do 2 per team, just break down some of the big time names that when you turn on the Big 12 you can say, oh hey, there's that guy that we were talking about on Just Another College Football Podcast. So we'll break it all down right after this, so stick with us.